everyone. Welcome back to Midweek at the Compass. My name's Jake. I'm our online pastor and our Three Rivers pastor. And as we usually do, we are working through our sermon series called Jackpot. You know, on our weekends, we're talking about just the mind-blowing benefits that come from knowing Jesus. But at the same time, we also realize that there's the flip side of every coin because we live here on planet Earth and things are just not perfect. And we wanted to take the time on Midweek, again, to just continue the conversations around mental health and the opposites of what we are seeing from our weekend services. So it's heavy at times, but it's so important to be able to have these conversations, to be able to honestly assess where we are and know that there are people that love and care for us and a God who loves and cares for us. And that's why I'm excited that I'm joined again this week by some new friends. So Ann and Rick, thank you for taking the time to join today.
Thank you.
I'm wondering just really quickly, could you introduce yourselves so people have a better understanding of just who you are and how you're here?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Rick. I'm a counselor at a place called Alongside Ministries in Richland, Michigan. So I've been working there for about 3 years. We were formerly missionaries, pastor before that, and an engineer coming out of school. So it's been a lot of careers.
And what about you?
Yeah, my name is Ann. Really happy to be here. And I work for an organization called Trauma Free World. And we train people globally to help their organizations become trauma informed. My specific role is to help people become affiliate trainers all around the world. So we'll help people become an affiliate trainer so they can train material in their own organization and help kids or teens or adults with trauma in their past along their journey. And yeah, we're in over 25 countries. We've got multiple languages that our materials translated into. So it's really been a joy to walk alongside people as they journey towards health.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I want to take just a quick second about two things. How do you know the Compass Church if you are in the Michigan area? Maybe you could let us behind the scenes there.
Very good friend with Jeff Griffin.
Some of you may have heard of him.
Pastor Jeff. So, I mean, in fact, our moms were college friends, and so we've grown up with the Griffin family, spent lots of time together. I worked as a campus pastor with Jeff before he transitioned to the Compass.
Gotcha.
And so we're close.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We are missionaries of the Compass. So the Compass is is our primary supporting church.
I love that.
Yes.
I love letting people behind the scenes on even just that level of things. And Rick, just really quickly, I have a kinship with you already because I came out of workplace life to go into ministry, and that workplace life was working as a consultant at an engineering firm.
Nice. All right. We had a very technical conversation today, then.
Let's get into the nuts and bolts of. No, we're not going to talk engineering, okay. But we do want to take the moment. You mentioned what you do, and it's trauma-based. So we are going to have a conversation around that, and I would love to just start with the high-level question: just what is trauma? Can we just set definitions for people so when we use that term, they're going to know what we're talking about?
Yeah, sure. When we talk about trauma really is anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope. So that can look different for different people. What you may experience as trauma might not be traumatic to me, and vice versa. But trauma, it's that thing that happens to us that makes us feel like, oh, this could cost me my life. So those would be some of the bigger traumas, or it could be even something that this is so overwhelming to me that this is going to affect me for the rest of my life.
And what would be some examples? I know you said trauma can look different and things may be traumatic for me and not for one of you, vice versa. So can we just talk, what are some of the big things that we would see that would be considered trauma, but also some of the smaller things that maybe we don't associate with that word quite as frequently?
Yeah, I do think of it as like along a continuum, right? From little t traumas to big T traumas. Right on the far end, the bigger ones are often things that are life-threatening. So if you were in war, if you were natural disasters, assault, a car accident, like you're pinned in, like those kinds of things are often recognized life-threatening, big T trauma. On the other side of it, it's really hard, right? Because it's gray. I mean, it's just, but on the lighter sides of it, it could be embarrassing moments, right? Things that happened to you as a kid that were embarrassing that you remember. It could be growing up in a home where there was neglect or maybe expected perfectionism. And so you come home with all A's on your report card, and parents' response is, you missed 2, right? Why didn't you get an A+? And it seems insignificant, but that can really settle in to a child's life and be traumatic.
So when people are experiencing trauma, what's happening biologically, physiologically? Like, what are the things that you would say you see most frequently, or people could expect of if they've experienced trauma, this is what's happening to their brain, this is what's happening to their body?
Okay. I'm going to answer that one. I'm a nurse, and so I'm going to nerd out a little bit on the science around this.
Let's do it.
So let's do that. When we experience something traumatic, our cortisol levels start to go up in our bodies.
And could you explain real quick cortisol?
Yes. Cortisol is our stress hormone. So all trauma is stressful. Not all stress is trauma, but what we see is an elevated level of the stress, the anxiety, the fear, like all of that rises. So cortisol starts to rise in our body. And while that can be really helpful to us, like before we gave this podcast and we were all a little bit nervous, and so our cortisol shot up and we're like, okay, now we're ready for it. We're going to be like in the moment. Like when we get away from this, that'll calm down. Our cortisol levels will go down. We'll start to feel safe. We'll just be back at our normal level of functioning. But when somebody experiences trauma and then they keep re-experiencing it because they have lots of triggers, potentially because they live in a perpetually traumatic environment, and that stress hormone, cortisol, stays elevated all the time, it can have really long-term damaging effects on a body. So where it's helpful in a short-term situation, over the long haul, high levels of stress hormone are actually toxic to our body. And if we don't deal with our trauma and process it in healthy ways and stuff it, any stuffers out there, right? It's still going to come out, but it's going to come out in the form of sweating, high blood pressure, high heart rates, autoimmune disorders, diabetes, cancer. I mean, ultimately, if you don't deal with your stress, it's going to kill you. So that's what we're looking at, like in terms of the body.
Okay.
And then if we want to move into the brain, like as soon as we move into the brain, we have, we'll just, to simplify things, there's kind of 2 parts of your brain, we'll say. There's the front thinking part of your brain that's like right behind your forehead. So this is where we have all of our executive functioning skills, our high level thinking skills. So hopefully that part of your brain right now is really active. You're listening to me, you're able to pay attention. If I say something, you're thinking of a question to ask me back. Like, that's the part of our brain, our thinking brain. It's also where we have like impulse control and conscience and our ability to like pivot and make a different decision about something. But when we enter a form of stress or trauma and we move to what's called the fear part of our brain. And that's in the back, like by the top of the brainstem, right at the top of your neck there, base of your head. And that part of the brain is where we see the fight, flight, or freeze response. So if I experience trauma, I'm going to quickly move to that part of the brain. It's kind of like this. Like right now, you're in your calm brain, right? You're thinking, you've got access to your whole brain. Let's say we hear the door slam. All of a sudden, our attention is going to shift, and we're going to look over at the door and be like, oh my gosh, somebody's coming in the door. So now we're in our alert brain. The very front part of our brain is shut off. We're into alert. And we're going to look and be like, oh, it's just Cassie. Cassie's coming in the room. We all go back to calm brain. But what if it was a lion that came in the room? Right? If a lion comes in the room, there is literally nothing that I'm going to say to you that's going to cause you to listen to me, to pay attention to me. Like, you're like, how am I going to get myself safe? Like, you're fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Yeah.
So for our friends and ourselves, when we have trauma that's unresolved and we become triggered, that's where we are. As soon as that hits, we're back in the fear part of our brain. We're not using any of our executive functions. We're operating out of what we call survival behavior. And so survival behavior often looks like bad behavior. It's manipulation. It's triangulation. It's violence. It's aggression. A lot of control issues, because when I wasn't in control, bad things happened. So I'm going to control everything because at least I'll feel safe.
I would love to ask a follow-up just on that last part, if you don't mind. When you're talking about things like triangulation and manipulation and control, those seem to be like they would be telltale signs of trauma, but are they always based on trauma, or is it something where you see kind of a variety of ends of how that plays out?
I think that's a really good question. I would say from our experience, you don't know. You don't actually know if what you're seeing is just, let's call it bad behavior, or we call it, what's it called? When a willful disobedience. A child might just be willfully disobeying to test boundaries, right? Or if it's a trauma response and they're moving to survival behavior. But what we would say is no matter what it is, if you can use a trauma-informed approach and assume that that is some kind of survival behavior and try to connect with that person and help them feel safe first, then you can move to a place where you can help correct the behavior when they're in their calm state again.
Okay. Large scale here. How many people do you think, or are there studies that would deal with trauma or have something in their life that is a traumatic event that they can kind of go back to? Are we talking 100%, 10%, something in between? What's your take on that?
Yeah, there's a recent study that was done, and as they moved away from kind of like big T, life-threatening issues to kind of this wider range, it said that all over the world, 70% of people have experienced trauma at some level and are dealing with the impacts of it. And
wow.
Yeah, 70%.
That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
well over half the people walking into a door of a church are coping or managing or dealing or have some sort of trauma in their backdrop. Same with
Right.
any workplace you walk into, your home. That's a scary thought too.
It
But goodness, we could go so many directions with that. But why don't we park it for a minute? I want to go back to just when we're talking about trauma and we're looking at just length of time. So if somebody has a traumatic event in their childhood, is there a difference in the length of time away from the event of how it impacts them? Is there any correlation to depth of time, length of time, or is that a case-by-case basis as well of how people are managing and coping with it?
Yeah, people are incredibly resilient, and people will generally adapt to manage the stress, right, that could be induced by the traumatic experience. So what we know is that if you're regularly dealing with the stress, it will, often people deal with that by just kind of pushing it down, ignoring it, relying on some skill that I've developed to be able to manage life and make it work. I became a great question asker, right? Because I would be... didn't love the spotlight on me, so I quickly ask questions to begin to deal with, so the spotlight would shift.
Yeah.
But the longer that you push that down and don't deal with it, it eventually comes out. And it will come out in behavior. It could come out in physical symptoms, like Ann was referring to, and just in getting sick more often, or just come out in your body somewhere. So there is such an invitation, if you will, to deal with those what might seem like insignificant, traumatic, stressful events, because you don't want it to remain in your body.
Yeah.
It comes out somewhere. It leaks out. And often it's when I think it's often kind of you hit the 40 years old, right? You run into something that just magnifies this thing that you thought you could contain. But now it's a big deal. There's a life issue that all of a sudden you're dealing with.
So you're telling me I've got 2 years before the wheels fall off. Yeah. I want to ask another question that might have a follow-up. But just generally speaking, if trauma is left unresolved, we talked about the physical things that happen, but what do you see as being maybe like the psychological end? Like, what does unresolved trauma ultimately, in your experience, lead towards?
Yeah, there's a lot of common things, that it'll begin to look like, right? So someone could just say, I deal with anxiety, right? I've just noticed that I'm always anxious. Other people go kind of towards depression. I've got low mood. I'm depressed. Other people are irritable, right? Other people have an anger issue. It's these things that are very common, kind of you recognize in lots of different places, but they are often signs of a traumatic experience that has not been dealt with. So difficulty sleeping, nightmares, body aches, digestive issues, right? Common physical symptoms like that can be indicators of trauma. I have cognitive issues, right? I have a hard time making decisions. I blame myself for things. So it's been fascinating to me. The more I learn about trauma, the more you begin to see that common life experiences often have roots in traumatic experiences.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you said something to all of our staff earlier, even today, that I'm hoping you can come up with the same answer here. But you were saying that there is more or less, there's a common cause and a common solution when it comes to trauma. That there's one thing that you have seen more regularly than not that kind of causes trauma, and one thing that kind of helps. I wonder if you might be able to go a little more in depth on that as well, if you remember.
Are you talking about we're wounded in the context of relationship?
That is 100% where I'm going at.
In the context of safe, loving relationships.
So can you expound on both ends of that? So you are wounded in relationships and you heal through healthy relationships. What does each end of that look like from what you've seen?
Yeah, maybe I'll get us started, but feel free to, we do life very closely together with other people, right? And from the time that we come into this world, right, you need somebody else to take care of you. And so God has designed us in a way that we need other people. But when we bring our needs to other people, sometimes people aren't ready for them or don't have the capacity to be able to see and meet that need. And so instead of being cared for, I'm actually wounded in that experience. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes not, but there's wounding that happens between people. And then on the flip side of that, so how do you heal from that, right? So often it's in having a different experience with another human being, right? I take the chance again to bring a need or to just say, I have a story that I want to share with you. Are you willing to listen? And when someone says, oh, yeah, let me take time to listen, and they stay with me, that's a new experience. Like all of a sudden there's a new track in my mind that says people can take care of me. I can trust people again.
And I have to imagine that's got to be incredibly difficult to get over that hurdle, right? Like if you've been hurt by people, the solution is to trust people. How would you recommend starting that process?
It takes time. Yeah. It takes as long as it takes for someone to heal. But one of the things that we really intentionally talk about is that for us as parents or leaders or just it being people working with other people, it is to our side to actually initiate connection and initiate relationship building with someone else. And so we're going to take the initiative to look in someone's eyes, to pay attention to what they're saying. When they bring something up, to be like, oh my gosh, this person never talks. I'm going to listen to what you have to say, and I'm going to draw you out and let you know that I heard you, and help try to give you voice to what's going on that's deeper until you trust me, and then we can continue a deeper conversation. So we have lots of different ways of intentionally connecting with other people so that we can start to build a bridge and they start to feel safe.
I like that. I like that a lot. I don't know that I would have ever thought that it's not actually on the person, it's on others to initiate conversations like that when they notice something or they notice someone feels unsafe or hurt or scared or anxious, and how to present yourself in a way to be a safe space for them.
Such an important reminder to parents, right? You are dealing with children who might be, misbehaving in such a way, but for the parent to settle themselves, attuned to their child, right? What's going on? Like recognize in the back of your mind that there's likely something happened, something's going on, and it's just coming out in behavior. But if the parent can first regulate themselves, enter into their child's experience, then that child might, right, Lord willing, open up And I think I do a lot of couples therapy too. The same thing happens between husbands and wives.
Interesting.
This person matters a lot to me, and she's hurt me. And so how do we begin to have a conversation together where we can restore that trust?
Well, this has already been worth its weight in gold for me. Like, just hearing that, I feel like you were talking exactly to me. Just with my kids, I love my kids to death. There is one of them just acts out more regularly than others, and just the reminder of take a step back, breathe. What's actually going on?
Yeah.
Like, don't dysregulate your kid even further.
Exactly.
Like, man, that's really, really well said. Thank you.
We like to say in our training that there's meaning behind behavior. All behavior has a meaning behind it, and it's to our side to get curious, not furious, and uncover what's the deeper story going on.
Oh, that's so good. With this being the Compass Church, there has been a stigma, maybe we'll put it that way, of church and mental health just haven't always been two sides of the same coin or even related whatsoever. And yet I feel like as a society, seeing more and more the importance of both. Yeah. So from a spiritual practice end, what sorts of things would you recommend to people who are dealing with trauma? What spiritual practices do you think are helpful, at least in certain situations, that people could ultimately look to try to address some of their past hurt and present manifestations of it?
Yeah, I have a couple of them. One of the things I love about Jesus is he makes these little small statements that like reverberate throughout history into our very present lives today, because he knew some of the things that would be really good for us, and it can be easy to pass over them. But a really good practice to heal from trauma is the idea of practicing gratitude. So Jesus says it hundreds of times in the Bible, like enter his gates with thanksgiving, give thanks in all circumstances, be thankful. Like it's all of that. He says it over and over again because our brains have this negativity bias. We tend to be drawn towards the negative news and the bad information. But what he knows, and now science is finally telling us, is that if we actually practice gratitude intentionally, it changes our brain structure. It actually improves our mental health. We'll have, you can improve like symptoms of depression, anxiety. Those tend to start getting better. It improves our actual physical health. People who practice gratitude actually live longer than people who don't. It improves our social life. We have better relationships. We perceive our relationships as going better, and we become less selfish. People that practice gratitude make more money than people that don't.
Hey, there's practical for everybody, right?
Yeah. So the simple practice of being thankful. And I just would say it takes a minute, literally. Think of 3 things you're thankful for, hone in on one, and just sit with it. Sit with it for a minute. What are all the nuanced pieces of why you're so thankful for that thing? And then move on. We all have a minute in the day, right, to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would toss out from a spiritual practice end, or
maybe the other side of that is the practice of lament.
Interesting.
So we live in a very difficult world, a world that comes at us and we don't always understand, don't often understand. There's lots of loss in the world, and sometimes we're left with that question of what do we do with our pain? And some Christians might say, like, I don't feel pain, right? God doesn't allow me to that. Like they try to spiritualize it in some way, but God has actually given us a spiritual practice to be able to manage the pain, and that's to offer it to him. So if you Google Psalms of Lament, you'll read lots of example in the Bible of people crying out to God with questions, concerns, pain, confusion. And it's taking these things that are living inside of us, instead of burying them or ignoring them, you pour them out to God who wants them. He wants to carry them for you. But that practice of pouring out those words, putting it on a piece of paper, releases it from our body, gives it to God, who is more than able and willing to carry it for us. I
gotta say, I love that you used both of those examples because I have a church background where I feel like the answer was put on a good Christian face.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's like, oh, well, I'll be thankful. And I'm using the air quotes for people that aren't watching, right? Like you pretend to put on a face. And there are times where you do need to intentionally choose to be full of gratitude. But at the same time, God isn't scared of our thoughts or our emotions. He's given us to them, and it's healthy to present them. It's not like he's surprised by it. And they're both equally valid and necessary.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. I would love to if there anything else from that end that you guys have, or
I have just one other thing. And kind of going back to the relational piece of it, so what we need in order to manage our anxiety in the midst of coming through trauma is another person. And I believe at times, right, God is that other person, right? So one of the beautiful things about having a faith, a relationship with God that's real, where we're praying to Him, we're listening for Him, we're worshiping, is that there's a real relationship there, and that relationship is vital when we are going through these moments. There's more, right? A tangible person is helpful, is necessary, but knowing that our faith leads us to relationship with God, that's a power to draw on.
Yeah. So if people have experienced trauma, if we're at 70% that we talked about earlier, they have some sort of traumatic experience that they're grappling with, what would you recommend as good next steps? I feel like we've kind of glossed through a couple of them, but I'd love to just kind of explicitly lay them out. What would be good next steps for people to consider?
Yeah, it's a big question.
Yeah.
And in some cases, people do need this isn't self-promoting here, but you do need a safe person who's been trained to help draw out powerful and personal stories. There's something, part of the therapist code of ethics, right, is you don't counsel a friend.
Interesting.
because there's something between you and a friend that keeps you from saying hard things, or maybe keeps you from saying the hard things because you just don't want, like, we're managing another relationship. But if you can go to a person who can create safety and just be able to speak out the pain, the hurt, the experiences that you've had, that might be a necessary step that someone needs to take, depending on the trauma that's being dealt with. In other cases, right, there can just be an invitation in a small group, right, that we are willing to be able to share those vulnerable parts of ourselves, and we as a group, we're not going to try to fix you or dig deeper into beyond what you want to give, but we're just going to create a safe place to reflect what we're hearing and just sit with you, and that might be what people need. Safety is what shifts people. I feel safe, I'll share my story. When I share my story and I see it reflected, when you empathize with me, now I have a different experience. It undoes the trauma that so often hurt me.
Oh, that's good. I would love to just kind of leave it with open-ended. And that's not shameless self-promotion, by the way.
Okay.
You feel free by all means. That's part of why I'm glad we're doing this. There are definitely times where the unbiased, trained person is 100% necessary, needed, healthy, helpful, all of that. So thank you for, not pulling punches and backing away from it. But just the open-ended, I would love to wrap up our time together. It's just, do you have any sort of parting thoughts, anything that you want to make sure that maybe we didn't get to that you would just give as an encouragement, or anything maybe you wanted to cover that I just didn't ask the question of?
There's a story that I shared earlier that when we've experienced trauma, and especially if it was long ago, and if it was something that we wonder, was this really traumatic? It can settle things in our body that we carry with us for a long period of time. So, right, the story I shared was a second grade memory of just not knowing an answer to a question and then kind of doubting myself in some way. And if I find myself even today in a position where I don't know, all that second grade memory can come flooding forward, and I can be stuck in that same memory. And it can be despair inducing, right? If I'm like, I'll never get over that because I don't see back to where it's coming from. And so there's this like passion that has like come up in me to say, I hope everybody has the opportunity to see where these places where they're stuck, where they're rooted. Because if you can heal where they're rooted, they can change. Things that you've been stuck in, things that I was stuck in for so long have shifted in my life, not out of discipline or out of knowing a different truth, but out of like understanding where they were rooted. And I think that's just my hope for people.
Yeah.
This trauma thing is a big deal. It sits in our bodies and it doesn't have a memory with time.
Interesting.
It comes back in full force.
Yeah, so the last thing is if people want to know more about you, knowing that, you said you are mission partners with us, where can people get a little bit more information about what all you are doing here?
Yeah, you can shoot me an email. I'm AnnSmith@traumafreeworld.org, so you can reach out and connect with me that way if you're looking for more information on being trained in trauma-informed care. We're going to be training here at the Compass in the summer, our full advanced course. It's 3 full days of training and being trauma-informed.
Oh, good.
So you can catch us there as well.
And I think you said that's in the July timeframe, correct?
Yeah,
Somewhere
I'm gonna
around
have to
there?
look that up. I think it's July.
And we'll put it in the show notes afterwards. It'll be fine. Awesome. Rick, Ann, I just want to take a moment again to say thank you for taking the time to do this, for talking to our whole staff, for talking to everybody here on our podcast as well. It's just really good for people to know that they're not alone, that there are tangible things that we can be looking to do. And there are so many avenues for support and care, and we want to be able to offer that to as many as we can. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank all of you for joining us as well. We're going to be back next week wrapping up our Jackpot series, and we're going to be back here talking more about mental health and ways that we can best try and deal with it. So we will have that conversation here at Midweek at the Compass.